There's a popular alternative to rent in South Korea, where you can pay nothing and still live in a house. It's called Jeonse, and here's how it works. The tenant gives cash worth about 50 to 80% of the house's value to the homeowner, which is the deposit. The homeowner then goes and invests it. And after a while, called the period, where the tenant can live in the house, the homeowner returns the money to the tenant, having made money from the investment themselves. In order for Jeonse to be worth it, the money made must be more than what they'd make on rent. The owner doesn't have to be an investment genius or anything, just have some advantage over the tenant in how they can use this money. I'll cover two approaches they can take, one popular in the past and one popular currently. One approach in the past was to invest it into businesses, which could yield higher rates of return than possible from the tenant. Then, the homeowner is essentially borrowing money from the tenant with the house's collateral, which is worth it for both of them if the homeowner is competent. Back when Korea was developing and with high interest rates for borrowing, the Jeonse system was key for stimulating growth and helping out small businesses. Nowadays, the common strategy is to buy more houses and then put them up for Jeonse as well, which makes money purely from the growth in the value of housing. So then, how does this one beat rent? Well, we can take a look at some of the math behind this. We can assume that a period is 2 years, though it doesn't really matter. M is the value of the house, G is the growth in house value, R is the rent paid expressed as a percentage of the house value, J is the percentage of the house value set as Jeonse deposit, and I is the gain from investing for those 2 years. So if the homeowner chooses to do rent, they can get both the rent money and the money made from selling the house off at a higher price than they bought it for when they do sell it eventually. This gives the formula G plus R times M. On the other hand, if they choose to do Jeonse, the homeowner can invest a multiple of their original money in the market because of the loaning they do. As an example, assuming the homeowner gets 80% of their money back from each Jeonse, they can buy up to 5 times their original money's worth of Jeonse from these deposits. If you've seen some economics, you might also recognize this pattern in the fiscal spending multiplier formula. If you want a nice visual proof of the formula, I'll be linking one in the description below. Then Jeonse is worth it for the homeowner if the money they gain from it is greater than the money they gain from rent, which is basically just setting the two equations to be unequal to each other. We can do some simplification to ultimately get the bottommost inequality. Now let's take a look at things for the tenant. When they choose to do rent, they lose the rent money. When they choose Jeonse, they don't lose any money, but they lose the chance to take that money and invest it themselves to get more money. Similar to the homeowner, we can also get a simplified inequality to determine if Jeonse is worth it for the tenant. With this model, we can take a look at how changes in the rent market, housing cost growth, and interest might affect how well Jeonse does. I've got this graph pulled up in Desmos. Here, the purple area represents the range of values of the Jeonse percentage that the tenant is going to be willing to agree on, and the red represents the range of Jeonse values that the homeowner is going to be willing to agree on. We can take a look at how G, I, and R respectively affect this. So as G increases, the red area will increase, which means that the homeowner gets more value from the Jeonse arrangement, and so they're more willing to go down. An increase in I corresponds to a decrease in the range that the tenant is willing to agree on. And while R increases both, an increase in R tends to make them come to an agreement. Intuitively, this double win situation is allowed to exist because under Jeonse, each homeowner purchases more houses. And this pushes other homeowners out of the market, and the money they used to get can be distributed among the remaining homeowners and tenants. Nowadays, the trend is shifting towards borrowing money to pay for Jeonse. The final results for this are nearly identical, except instead of missing out on investment money as a tenant, they're being costed interest for borrowing, hence the swapping out of I with I sub L. Moving on. Now, what happens when housing prices don't rise as expected? Let's take a look at a case where the Jeonse deposit percentage is 80% and the homeowner started with 500 million won in the market. So they've got a total house value of 4,000 million won. When the housing market crashes, for example with 10%, all the properties decrease in value, resulting in a massive loss of 80% after all debts to tenants are repaid. However, the homeowner is affected much less by the crash if they choose to rent, even if they charge only a small amount. So Jeonse can go bad really quickly. An example of how things can get out of hand is the rapid increase in Jeonse fraud from 2015 to 2022. For some context, we're measuring this by how much the HUG, or Housing and Urban Guarantee Corporation, pays in cleanup. If the tenant gives money, the owner goes off with it, and returns with nothing or a smaller amount of money, the HUG steps in to repay the tenant somehow. As house prices decreased and interest rates trended up, the money the HUG had to pay went up nearly 100,000%. So this shows that while Jeonse can be lucrative, it is also very risky. And as a tenant, you also need to watch out for fraud. To sum it up, Jeonse is hardly free housing, just like investment is hardly free money. It's not miraculous or a scam, just a rent alternative. And sometimes it can be pretty neat, and sometimes it can be really bad. Thanks for sticking around, and that's all.